Get her out of here.
No one moved. Evander Mercer looked toward the security officers standing beside the boardroom doors.
I said remove her!
They can't, the chairman replied. Evander's eyes stayed fixed on me. Why not? Because she now controls the debt keeping this company alive. The silence that followed was almost beautiful. 5 years earlier, Evander had stood beneath the Mercer Global sign and watched police force me into the back of a cruiser. It was raining hard that night. My wrists were handcuffed. My name had already been handed to the press. My career had been destroyed, and every person in that building had been told that I was a thief. Evander had not tried to stop it. He had arranged it. Now I stood at the head of his polished mahogany table in an obsidian suit tailored sharp enough to cut glass, gold hoops catching the morning light. Around us sat the same executives who had lowered their eyes as I was dragged away. Some recognized me immediately. Others needed a few seconds before the blood drained from their faces. Evander gripped the armrests of his leather chair until his knuckles turned white. "You're supposed to be in prison," he said. I was. His breathing changed. The board members thought they were watching a disgraced former employee return for revenge. What they did not yet understand was that I had not come back merely to expose what Evander had done to me. I had come back carrying proof that the empire bearing his family's name had been built on a crime, and before the morning was over, he would have to choose between surrendering Mercer Global or letting the whole world see exactly what he had buried. There was a time Evander Mercer's name was the only one that mattered in that building. That time ended the moment I walked back in. Before we step fully into this boardroom, I want to take a moment to thank the faithful, hard-working women tuning in right now. You are the reason this channel is a sanctuary. If you are ready for a story about taking back what is yours, hit that subscribe button for free and drop "I'm a Queen" in the comments, along with your city or state. Let them know where we are listening from today. Evander thought he had buried his past to save his family's legacy. He did not know his past was about to foreclose on his future. But what happens when the woman you destroyed is the only one who can save you? The silence in the room stretched until it became a physical weight. The board members of Mercer Global sat frozen. These were men and women who had once looked at me with polite disdain when I was merely the CEO's brilliant working-class girlfriend. Now, they stared at me with undisguised panic. I placed a slim leather folio on the table. The soft thud echoed like a gunshot. "Good morning, gentlemen." And Valeria. My voice pulled Evander back to the present. It was smooth, rich, and entirely devoid of the warmth that used to melt him in the dark. It was a professional voice, a dangerous voice. Valeria Mercer sat near the floor-to-ceiling window, draped in pale cashmere, her silver hair immaculate. She did not look panicked. She looked annoyed. Her voice dripped with the same aristocratic venom she had wielded 5 years ago. "Ms. Vance," Valeria said, not bothering to hide her disgust. "I was informed that the representative from the holding company that purchased our distressed debt was a man named Arthur Sterling. I see he sent his assistant." I did not blink. I did not look at Evander, though I could feel his gaze burning into the side of my face. I looked directly at his mother. "Arthur Sterling is my employee, Valeria. He handles the paperwork. I handle the executions." I opened my folio and slid a single sheet of paper across the mahogany. "I am the sole proprietor of Vance Restitution Partners. As of 8 o'clock this morning, my firm holds the controlling interest in the $75 million of high-yield debt Mercer Global defaulted on last quarter, which means, under the covenants of your original loan agreement, I now have a permanent seat on this board, and I have the right to call an audit on any executive I choose." Cyrus, Evander's uncle, leaned forward. His face was flushed with indignation. "You cannot be serious. You are a convicted felon. The SEC would have a field day with this." I am a woman whose conviction was based on fabricated IP logs and a coerced witness who has since recanted. I interrupted, keeping my tone perfectly conversational. My record is currently under federal review, backed by the Department of Justice. But that is not why I am here, Cyrus. I am here because your company is bleeding. You have been using the same shell structures to hide your insolvency that you accused me of building 5 years ago. Evander finally found his voice. It was rough, unused to speaking my name aloud. What do you want, Zora? I turned my head slowly. I looked at the man I had once loved more than my own pride. He looked older. The polished, untouchable billionaire facade was cracked, revealing a deep, hollow exhaustion underneath. There was no anger in my eyes when I met his. Worse, there was no love. There was only the cold, calculating assessment of a predator looking at prey. I want full access to the internal servers, Evander. I want the unredacted ledgers from the past 60 months. And I want every person in this room to understand that if I find the fraud I know is buried here, I will not just report it. I will dismantle this company brick by brick. Valeria let out a sharp, brittle laugh. You expect us to hand over the keys to our kingdom after what you did? I smiled. It was a terrifying expression, even to me. I expect you to be desperate enough to realize I am the only one who knows how your labyrinth works. You have 30 days before the debt matures. If you do not cooperate, I call the loan. Mercer Global goes into receivership. You lose everything. I closed my folio and snapped the brass clasp shut. I will begin today. I turned and walked toward the heavy oak doors. My heels clicked against the marble floor, a steady, rhythmic countdown to their ruin. Zora. Evander stood up. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. Can we speak? Privately? I paused, my hand resting on the brass handle. I did not turn around. I kept my back to him, staring at my own reflection in the glass panel of the door. My schedule is quite full, Mr. Mercer. Have your assistant email mine. I opened the door and walked out. I left him standing in the boardroom, surrounded by his family and his failing empire, realizing that the woman he had sacrificed to save his fortune had just returned to take it all away. But as the elevator doors closed, shutting out the view of the Manhattan skyline, my hands began to shake. I pressed them flat against the cool metal wall of the elevator car and closed my eyes. The anger was a heavy armor, but underneath it, the old wounds were still bleeding. 5 years earlier, I had loved Evander Mercer before I understood the true cost of loving a man born inside a fortress. I was 26. I had clawed my way out of a working-class neighborhood in Brooklyn, studying under streetlights and working double shifts to graduate top of my class at Columbia. I was hired at Mercer Global as a forensic accounting prodigy, brought in to optimize their charity divisions. I was sharp, relentless, and entirely unimpressed by old money. Evander was the heir apparent. To the press, he was cold and ruthless. To his competitors, he was a shark. But with me, he had been different. He had been a man starving for authenticity. Our romance began in the quiet margins of our lives. It was shared coffees in the basement archives when the rest of the building was empty. It was his hand brushing mine in the elevator, a touch that sent electricity straight to my chest. It was late-night drives through the city where he would confess the crushing weight of his family's expectations, and I would remind him that he was more than his last name. I loved him because beneath the bespoke suits and the billionaire legacy, Evander was deeply, profoundly lonely. And he loved me because I was the only person who looked at him and saw a man, not a bank account. For a year, we loved each other in secret. Evander wanted to shout it from the rooftops. He wanted to put a ring on my finger and parade me through the penthouses of the Upper East Side. But I insisted on waiting. Your mother already looks at me like I am a liability, I told him one night, tracing the line of his jaw in the dark of his bedroom. Let me prove my worth to the board first. Let me build my own foundation. Then we will tell them." He had agreed. He kissed my forehead and told me I was the smartest woman he had ever known. That was the first compromise that would eventually destroy us. The collapse happened in November. I was running a routine audit on the charity fund when I found a discrepancy. $50 million had been siphoned over 3 years through a complex web of offshore accounts. The money was gone, but before I could bring the files to Evander, the trap was sprung. The funds were traced to a shadow account opened under my social security number. The authorization codes used to bypass the firewalls belonged to my terminal, and on the night the final transfer cleared, my key card had been used to access the server room. When the FBI arrived at my apartment, Evander was standing in the foyer of his family's estate. I had called him, frantic, terrified, my voice breaking over the phone. "Evander, they are saying I stole it. You know I was with you. Tell them." But Evander had been cornered. His mother, Valeria, had placed a dossier on his desk an hour before my arrest. The dossier proved that the $50 million had not been stolen by an outsider. It had been embezzled by Evander's late father to cover up a catastrophic failure in their European markets. If the truth came out, Mercer Global would face criminal negligence charges. The company would dissolve. Thousands of people would lose their jobs. The Mercer legacy would be erased. Valeria offered her son a solution. My credentials had been left logged in. They could frame me. It would be a clean narrative. A disgruntled, ambitious employee who got greedy. Valeria promised Evander that they would hire the best lawyers, that I would get probation, just a slap on the wrist, and he could quietly pay me back tenfold once the dust settled. Evander, terrified of losing his family's empire, paralyzed by the weight of his father's sins, made the coward's choice. He signed the affidavit. He chose the fortune over the woman. He thought I would get probation. He was wrong. The judge, eager to make a public example of corporate greed, sentenced me to 5 years in a federal correctional facility. I will never forget the night they took me. The freezing rain plastering my hair to my cheeks, the heavy steel of the handcuffs biting into my wrists. I had screamed his name. I had begged him to speak. But Evander just stood on the marble steps, flanked by his mother and his uncle, and watched me being pushed into the back of a cruiser. His silence became my sentence. Evander's guilt acted faster than his courage. The day after I was sentenced, he hired a shadow team of appellate lawyers, funneling millions through blind trusts to ensure my sentence was appealed and my conditions were safe. But he never visited. He never wrote. He told himself he did not deserve to look at me. He told himself he was protecting me from his toxic world. He did not know that 3 weeks into my sentence, I collapsed in the prison laundry room. He did not know that the prison doctor, a tired woman with kind eyes, ran a blood test and told me I was 2 months pregnant. He did not know about the night the twins were born. The federal medical ward was a sterile, unforgiving place. The walls were painted a sickly shade of green. The air smelled of bleach and industrial cleaner. I was strapped to a narrow bed, a heavy leather restraint around my ankle, while a guard stood outside the door. I did not have a lawyer. I did not have my family. I had a prison doctor and a steel sink. The pain was blinding, a physical tearing that felt like it was splitting my soul in half. But when I heard the first cry, sharp and furious, followed seconds later by a second, softer wail, something inside me shifted. The terrified, broken girl who had wept on the marble steps died in that room. They placed Elion and Lyra on my chest. They were so small, their skin warm against mine. I wrapped my arms around them, feeling the rapid beat of their hearts against my own. In that cold, concrete room, holding the children of the man who had betrayed me, I made a promise. I would not just survive. I would learn. I would adapt. I would use my mind to help the women around me navigate the system, trading my forensic skills for favors on the outside. I would amass capital in the shadows. And when I walked out, I would own the world that tried to bury me. 5 years later, I stepped out of a town car and walked up the steps of my Brooklyn brownstone. The evening air was crisp. It smelled of roasted nuts from a street vendor on the corner and the familiar exhaust of the city. It was a far cry from the sterile, filtered air of the Mercer estate, and I preferred it. This was real. This was mine. I unlocked the heavy wooden door and was immediately hit by a wall of sound. "Mommy!" Two small bodies collided with my legs. I dropped my leather briefcase and fell to my knees, wrapping my arms around my babies. Elian and Lyra, 4 years old. Elian had my dark, curly hair, but Evander's serious, observant gray eyes. He was quiet, analytical, always watching the world as if trying to decode it. Lyra was a force of nature. She had Evander's straight, dark hair and my fierce, unyielding spirit. "Hey, my loves," I whispered, burying my face in their necks. I breathed in the scent of baby shampoo and graham crackers. This was my hidden strength. This was the truth Evander Mercer did not know. When I had walked into that boardroom today, I had not just been carrying the debt of his company, I had been carrying his heirs. "Did you beat the bad guys today, Mommy?" Lyra asked, pulling back to look at me with wide, demanding eyes. She was holding a stuffed lion by the tail. I smiled, brushing a curl from her forehead. "I did not beat them, baby. I just showed them the rules of the game." Nia Hayes walked into the foyer, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Nia had been my best friend since college. She was a brilliant tech investigator, the one who had helped me build my shadow empire from the inside of a prison cell. She had visited me every single week. She had held my hand through the agonizing, terrifying hours of labor when the twins were born. "You look like you just went 12 rounds, Nia said, leaning against the doorframe. Her dark eyes scanned my face, looking for cracks in the armor. "Valeria Mercer is exactly as venomous as I remember," I said, standing up and lifting Elian into my arms. He rested his head on my shoulder, his thumb finding his mouth. "But they are scared, Nia. The company is hollow. Evander has been using smoke and mirrors to keep the stock price up, but the foundation is rotten." Nia's expression tightened. She crossed her arms. "And Evander, how was he?" My jaw clenched. I walked past her into the kitchen, setting Elian down so he could join Lyra on the rug. "He looks tired," but I did not go there to assess his complexion. I went there to secure the servers. Once I have the unredacted files, I can prove the original 50 million was routed by his father, not me. I can clear my name permanently. "And then?" Nia asked softly, following me to the island. I looked back at the twins. They were arguing over the stuffed lion, their voices bright and happy in the warm kitchen. "And then I call the debt. I take Mercer Global. I strip the name off the building, and I sell it for parts." Nia sighed. She poured 2 glasses of water and slid one across the marble counter to me. "Zora, you know as well as I do that taking down Mercer Global will not erase the last 5 years. You are playing a dangerous game. If Evander figures out you are doing this for revenge and not just restitution, he will fight back. He is still a Mercer." I picked up the glass. The water was cold against my palm. "He lost the right to fight back the night he let them put handcuffs on me. He chose his money. Now I am taking it." I took a sip, but the water did nothing to wash away the tight knot of anxiety in my chest. I had spent 5 years building this moment. I had amassed the capital. I had bought the debt. I was ready. So why did the image of Evander's hollowed-out face in the boardroom make my hands shake? I had wanted him to look destroyed, but seeing the actual ruin in his eyes did not bring me the satisfaction I had craved in the dark. It just brought back the grief. And grief was a luxury I could not afford. Not when I had a 30-day countdown to burn his empire to the ground. The next morning, The warmth of my Brooklyn brownstone was replaced by the sterile chill of my temporary Manhattan office. The space was a study in functional aggression. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the financial district, offering a panoramic view of the glass towers, where men like Evander Mercer played God with other people's livelihoods. My desk was a slab of reclaimed oak, currently buried under stacks of printed financial disclosures and legal covenants. Nia was already there when I arrived. She had commandeered the corner workstation, surrounded by 3 curved monitors glowing with lines of code and complex data visualizations. She did not look up when I walked in. The rapid staccato of her mechanical keyboard was the only sound in the room. I set my coffee on the desk and unbuttoned my coat. "Tell me you found something." Nia stopped typing. She leaned back in her ergonomic chair and rubbed her eyes. She looked exhausted, but there was a sharp, predatory gleam in her dark eyes. "I found a graveyard," Nia said. She tapped a key, and the center monitor shifted to display a sprawling web of interconnected corporate entities. I bypassed the surface-level firewalls they set up for the SEC, the ones they wanted us to see. Underneath that, the company is entirely hollowed out, Zora. I walked over and stood behind her chair, studying the screen. "Show me." "Look at these subsidiary accounts," Nia said, pointing to a cluster of red nodes. "They have been routing operational costs through shell companies in the Caymans for the last 3 years. But the money is not going to vendors. It is going into debt servicing. They are borrowing against their own intellectual property, just to make payroll." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Evander's father did not just embezzle $50 million. He leveraged the entire foundation of the company. "Exactly," Nia said. "When the European markets crashed 5 years ago, Richard Mercer tried to cover the losses by taking out high-yield loans. He used Mercer Global's core software patents as collateral. When he could not pay them back, he started siphoning from the charity fund to cover the interest. That is the 50 million you found." I stared at the red nodes. 5 years ago, I had thought I uncovered a simple case of executive greed. I had not realized I was looking at a structural collapse. "If the patents are collateral," I said slowly, "then the holding company that bought the debt owns the patents," Nia finished, "which means your firm, Vance Restitution Partners, technically owns the engine that runs Mercer Global. Evander is just renting his own legacy." I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had inverted completely. Evander was sitting on a throne of sand, and I held the tide. Nia turned her chair to face me. Her expression was serious, stripped of its usual playful edge. "This is good news, Zora, but it is also dangerous. Valeria and Cyrus know the walls are closing in. They are not going to just hand over the keys because you have a legal right to them." "I have the debt," I said. "They have no choice." "Evander is still a Mercer," Nia warned. "He grew up in this world. He knows how to play dirty when his back is against the wall. Do not underestimate him, just because he looked sad in that boardroom." My jaw tightened. I am not underestimating him. I know exactly what he is capable of. I walked back to my desk and sat down. I pulled a file toward me, but the numbers blurred on the page. Nia was right. I knew Evander intimately. I knew the way his mind worked, the way he compartmentalized stress, the way he could convince himself that a terrible choice was actually a noble sacrifice. That was the danger. I was playing a game of corporate chess against a man who knew all my tells. If you have ever had to stay quiet and let your actions speak instead of your words, drop a heart in the comments right now. Let us know you understand the power of moving in silence. For 3 days, we worked relentlessly. Nia mapped the entire shadow network of Mercer Global's finances, building an airtight case of corporate fraud. I drafted the legal mechanisms required to call in the collateral and force a total restructuring of the board. We barely slept. We ordered takeout and drank too much coffee, fueled by the adrenaline of impending victory. But Valeria Mercer was not going to wait for the 30-day countdown to expire. The first escalation came on a Thursday afternoon. I was reviewing a stack of employee pension files when my phone buzzed on the desk. It was an alert from my legal team. I opened the email, and my blood ran cold. A prominent financial blog had just published a scathing front-page exposé. The headline read, "Vance Restitution Partners, a front for organized money laundering." I clicked the link. The article was a masterclass in character assassination. It detailed my criminal record, heavily implying that the capital I used to buy Mercer Global's debt was sourced from illicit prison syndicates. It claimed I was orchestrating a hostile takeover using extorted funds. It was a lie from start to finish, but it was written with just enough plausible deniability to sound like investigative journalism. Before I could even process the words, my office phone began to ring. It was Arthur Sterling, my lead investor. "Zora," Arthur said, his voice tight with panic. "Tell me this article is garbage." "It is entirely fabricated, Arthur," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "Valeria Mercer is trying to bleed my liquidity before the debt matures. It is a smear campaign." "My board does not care if it is fabricated," Arthur replied. "The optics are toxic. We are pulling our backing." "I am sorry, Zora. We cannot be associated with this." The line went dead. Within an hour, a second investor pulled out. My operating capital was shrinking by the minute. If I lost my liquidity, I could not maintain the legal pressure on the debt. The board would vote to block my access to the servers, and Valeria would win. I stared at the screen, my hands gripping the edge of the desk so hard my knuckles ached. Valeria was not playing by the rules of finance. She was playing by the rules of survival. She was trying to destroy my reputation so thoroughly that no one would stand beside me. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones who still think they own our story. If you have ever had to fight to take your narrative back, hit that subscribe button, because what Valeria Mercer is about to do next will test exactly how far Zora is willing to go. I was reaching for my phone to call Nia when the heavy glass door of my office opened. I looked up, expecting my assistant. Instead, Evander walked in. He did not knock. He did not wait for an invitation. He just stepped into the room and let the door click shut behind him. He looked worse than he had in the boardroom. His tie was loosened, the top button of his shirt undone. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, and the shadows under his gray eyes spoke of days without sleep. He looked like a man who had been running for a very long time and had finally hit a wall. I stood up slowly, my posture rigid. "Get out of my office, Evander." He stopped in the center of the room. He did not move toward me, but he did not leave. "I did not know about the article," he said immediately. His voice was rough, stripped of its usual polished cadence. My mother acted without board approval. I stepped around my desk, putting physical distance between us. "Do not pretend you are here to warn me. You came to gloat. You think because your mother threw a stone, I am going to shatter. You do not know who I am anymore." Evander looked at me. His eyes were filled with a desperate, aching grief that made my chest tighten. "I know exactly who you are. You are the smartest person I have ever met, and you are the only woman I have ever loved." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. They were the exact words he had whispered to me in the dark 5 years ago, right before the world ended. I let out a short, humorless laugh. "Love, do not use that word in this room. Love does not sign affidavits. Love does not watch a woman get dragged into a police car while she begs for her life. You did not love me, Evander. You loved the idea of me. The moment I became a liability to your precious fortune, you cut me loose." "I was trying to save the company." Evander's voice cracked. The polished CEO facade finally broke, revealing the terrified boy underneath. My father stole that money. If it came out, thousands of people would have lost their pensions, their livelihoods. My mother convinced me it was the only way. She promised me you would get probation. I swear to God, Zora, I thought I could fix it from the inside. I stopped pacing. I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt a surge of pure, unadulterated rage. Fix it? I stepped closer, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. You think you can fix a cage? Evander flinched. I gave birth in a federal medical ward, Evander, I said. The words tasted like ash in my mouth, but I forced them out. I was strapped to a bed while a guard watched. I did not have a lawyer. I did not have my family. I had a prison doctor and a steel sink. That is what your fix cost me. Evander went entirely still. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a corpse. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. What did you say? He whispered. The silence in the room was deafening. I realized my mistake. In my anger, I had let a piece of the truth slip. I had told him about the birth, but I had not told him about the children. I looked at his devastated face. For a fraction of a second, the old Zora, the one who had loved him enough to compromise her own boundaries, wanted to comfort him. She wanted to reach out and smooth the lines of panic from his forehead. But the new Zora, the one who had survived the dark, stepped back. I said, "Get out," I repeated, my voice like ice. "And tell your mother that if she publishes another lie about me, I will not just take her company. I will put her in the cell next to the one I occupied." Evander backed away. His hands were trembling. He looked at me as if I were a ghost he had summoned and could no longer control. He turned and walked out of the office. He did not look back. When the door clicked shut, the silence rushed back in. I sank into my chair and put my face in my hands. I had kept the twins a secret for 4 years. I had protected them from the toxicity of the Mercer name. But seeing Evander's pain, knowing that he was finally realizing the magnitude of his sin, did not bring me the satisfaction I had craved in the dark. It just brought back the grief, and my hands would not stop shaking. I stayed in my chair long after the elevator doors had closed on Evander. The silence in the Manhattan office felt heavy, pressing against my eardrums. My hands were still shaking. I pressed them flat against the cool surface of my reclaimed oak desk, willing the tremor to stop. I had wanted to break him. I had spent 5 years in a concrete box, dreaming of the moment I could look into his eyes and make him feel the exact weight of what he had done to me. I had wanted him to shatter, but seeing the actual ruin in his face, hearing the raw, unpolished crack in his voice when he said he thought he could fix it, did not bring me the victory I had imagined. It just made me tired. It made me realize that destroying him would not unhappen the past. It would not erase the cold steel of the bed in the medical ward. It would not give me back the 5 years I had lost. I packed my briefcase. I needed to find out how Valeria had orchestrated the smear campaign so quickly. The article on the financial blog was too detailed, too perfectly timed. It was not just a panicked reaction. It was a calculated strike. And if Valeria was willing to play this dirty, she was going to keep coming until I was entirely defunded. I left the glass tower and took a car back to Brooklyn. The city blurred past the tinted windows, a smear of gray rain and neon lights. By the time I unlocked the door to my brownstone, the sky was completely dark. The house was warm. It smelled of garlic and roasting tomatoes. From the living room, I could hear the bright, unmistakable sound of Elian laughing. "Mommy is home," Lyra yelled. I dropped my coat on the hall tree and walked into the living room. Elian was sitting on the rug, carefully stacking wooden blocks into a precarious tower. Lyra was draped over the back of the sofa, holding her stuffed lion upside down. They were safe. They were entirely untouched by the corporate war I was waging across the river. That was the only thing that mattered. Nia walked out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. She took one look at my face and stopped. "You look like you saw a ghost," Nia said quietly. "Worse," I replied, keeping my voice low so the twins would not hear. "I saw Evander. He came to the office." Nia's eyes darkened. "Did he threaten you?" "No," I said. The memory of his trembling hands flashed in my mind. He tried to apologize. He tried to tell me he thought I would only get probation. He looked like a man who has not slept in 5 years. "Good," Nia said, her voice hard. "Let him lose sleep. Let him suffer. Did you tell him about the kids?" "No. I told him I gave birth in prison." That was enough to break him. I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache blooming behind my eyes. But that is not why I am home early. Valeria launched a smear campaign today. A financial blog published an article claiming Vance Restitution Partners is a front for money laundering. Arthur Sterling pulled his backing. "I am bleeding capital, Nia. I need to know who fed that blog the false narrative." Nia untied her apron and tossed it onto a kitchen chair. "I will get my laptop. We will find the leak." "Let me do it," I said. "I need to do something with my hands that does not involve shaking." I went upstairs to my home office. It was a small room at the back of the brownstone, lined with bookshelves and dominated by a large desk. I booted up my secure terminal. The glow of the monitors cast long shadows against the walls. I started with the article itself. I pulled the metadata from the blog post, looking for the original submission IP address. The blog claimed the tip had come from an anonymous whistleblower inside the financial sector. But anonymous whistleblowers rarely used enterprise-grade encryption to hide their tracks. I ran a trace. The IP address bounced through 3 different proxy servers, one in Zurich, one in Singapore, and one in Delaware. It was a sophisticated routing protocol. Valeria had not done this herself. She had hired a professional. I bypassed the Delaware proxy using a backdoor exploit I had learned from a former cybersecurity analyst in Cell Block D. The true IP address resolved to a commercial building in Midtown Manhattan. I cross-referenced the address with the state corporate registry. The building housed a private security and risk management firm called Aegis Global. I leaned back in my chair. Aegis Global was known in the industry for doing the dirty work that high society families could not be associated with. They handled blackmail, corporate espionage, and media manipulation. Valeria had hired them to destroy my reputation. But I needed more than just the source. I needed the financial trail. If Aegis was running a smear campaign against a federally monitored debt holder, they were violating SEC regulations. If I could prove Valeria was paying them, I could have her indicted. I accessed the public financial disclosures for Aegis Global. As a private firm, their books were closed, but they had a subsidiary registered in the Cayman Islands that handled international consulting fees. I spent 2 hours digging through the subsidiary's leaked transaction logs, a database I had purchased access to years ago. I filtered the transactions by date, looking for a large payout made in the last 48 hours. Nothing. I frowned. If Valeria had commissioned the article this week, there should be a recent wire transfer. I expanded the search parameters to the last 6 months. Still nothing from the Mercer family accounts. Then, I noticed a recurring anomaly. There was a standing monthly transfer of $10,000. It had been deposited into the Aegis Cayman account on the 1st of every month for the last 4 years. The payments were labeled as consulting retainers, $10,000 a month, for 4 years. That was nearly $500,000. I traced the origin of the recurring payment. It was not coming from Mercer Global. It was not coming from Valeria or Cyrus. It was coming from a blind trust established in Nevada. I ran the trust's registration number through a federal database. The trust was managed by a high-end wealth management firm. I recognized the firm immediately. They were the primary fixers for the Mercer family estate. But the beneficiary of the trust, The person who was receiving the $10,000 a month from Aegis Global in exchange for these consulting services was not a Mercer. The name on the offshore account was Nia Hayes. I stopped breathing. The glow of the monitor seemed to burn into my retinas. I stared at the name, Nia Hayes, my best friend, the woman who had held my hand while I screamed in the federal medical ward. The woman who had helped me build my shadow empire. The woman who was currently downstairs making dinner for my children. And my mind scrambled to find an alternative explanation. A glitch, a stolen identity. But the account details matched perfectly. The routing numbers, the tax identification, the signature on the digital file, it was Nia. A cold, sickening wave of betrayal washed over me. It was worse than the handcuffs. It was worse than the judge's gavel. Valeria was my enemy. I expected her to strike, but Nia was my sister. She was the only family I had left, and she had been on the payroll of the man who destroyed me. I printed the transaction logs. The mechanical whir of the printer sounded deafening in the quiet house. I gathered the warm sheets of paper, my hands perfectly steady now. The shaking was gone. It had been replaced by a cold, absolute clarity. I walked downstairs. The kitchen was bright and warm. Nia was standing at the island, chopping vegetables for a salad. Elian and Lyra were sitting at the small wooden table in the corner, coloring in a book. "Mommy, look," Lyra said, holding up a page filled with aggressive purple scribbles. "I made a storm." "It is a beautiful storm, baby," I said. My voice sounded entirely normal. It was terrifying how normal it sounded. "Keep coloring." I walked over to the kitchen island. Nia looked up and smiled. "Find the leak?" she asked. I placed the printed transaction logs on the marble counter, right next to her cutting board. Nia glanced down. She saw the logo of the Cayman subsidiary. She saw the routing numbers. She saw her own name printed in stark black ink at the bottom of the page. The knife slipped from her hand and clattered against the wood. All the blood drained from her face. She looked at the paper, then up at me. Her eyes were wide with a sudden, terrible panic. "Zora," she whispered. "Care to explain why a private security firm hired by the Mercer family has been paying you $10,000 a month since I went to prison?" I asked. My voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of a physical blow. Nia took a step back. She looked toward the twins, who were entirely absorbed in their coloring. "Zora, please, let me explain." "You sold me out," I said. The words tasted like poison. "You were my lifeline. You were the only person I had in that place. And you were on his payroll." "No." Nia stepped forward, her voice fierce, though she kept it hushed. "No, Zora, I did not sell you out. I protected you." I crossed my arms, my expression stony. "By taking his money?" "By making sure you survived," Nia cried, a tear slipping down her cheek. She wiped it away angrily. "Do you think a woman like you, with your profile, was safe in general population? You were a high-profile white-collar inmate who took down a billionaire. The Mercer family had enemies inside, inmates who owed favors to people Evander had put out of business." I stared at her. The anger that had been sustaining me, the righteous fury that had fueled my 5-year plan, suddenly felt complicated. "I got a call 3 weeks after you were locked up," Nia continued, her voice shaking. "A man working for Evander. He said Evander was losing his mind with guilt. He said he wanted to ensure you were safe, but he could not do it publicly without his mother finding out and making it worse. He knew Valeria would cut off your protection if she knew he was intervening." Nia reached out, her hand hovering over the counter, wanting to touch me, but knowing she had lost the right. "He offered me the money to hire Aegis Global," Nia said. "He paid them to bribe the warden. He paid them to ensure you were transferred to the medical wing when you got sick. He paid them to make sure the guards looked the other way when I brought you extra food. I did not take it for me, Zora. I took it to build a wall around you. I hated him for what he did, but I loved you too much to let you die in there. If you did not see that coming, hit the like button right now. Because sometimes the people who hurt us are the same people desperately trying to keep us alive from the shadows. I stood frozen. The kitchen felt like it was spinning. I thought about the sudden transfer to the medical ward when my blood pressure dropped. I thought about the guard who always seemed to be looking the other way when Nia visited outside of designated hours. I thought about the prison doctor with the kind eyes who had held my hand while I gave birth. None of it had been luck. None of it had been mercy. It had been bought by him. "Why did you not tell me?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Because you needed to hate him to survive," Nia said softly. "If you knew he was trying to protect you, it would have broken your spirit. You needed to be angry, Zora. Anger kept you alive. It gave you the strength to build your firm. It gave you the strength to buy his debt. If you knew he still loved you, you would have forgiven him. And if you forgave him, you would have stayed a victim." I looked toward the living room. Elian had abandoned his blocks and was now helping Lyra color. They were laughing. They were the physical manifestation of my survival. Anger had kept me alive. Nia was right about that. But hearing the truth now did not make me feel powerful. It made me feel incredibly, profoundly hollow. My entire worldview was fracturing. I had built my empire on the foundation of Evander's betrayal. I had convinced myself that he was a monster who had discarded me to save his bank account. But monsters do not spend $500,000 in secret to keep the woman they destroyed safe from the dark. He had been a coward. He had chosen his family's legacy over my freedom. But he had never stopped loving me. He had just loved me from a distance, paralyzed by his own guilt. "You should have told me," I whispered. "I know," Nia said, her shoulders slumping. "I am sorry." I picked up the printed logs from the counter. I folded them neatly and put them in my pocket. I did not yell. I did not cry. The betrayal was too deep for tears. It was a quiet, structural damage that I would have to figure out how to live with. "I need some air," I said. I walked out the back door of the brownstone and stood on the small patio. The night air was cold. I looked up at the Manhattan skyline, a glittering wall of light across the river. Somewhere over there, Evander Mercer was sitting in his sterile penthouse, carrying the weight of a secret he thought I would never know. He thought he had protected me. He thought his money could balance the scales of my suffering. But as I stood in the dark, listening to the muffled sound of my children laughing inside the house, I realized something. Evander had not protected me. He had just funded my survival. I was the one who had protected myself. And tomorrow, I was going to make sure he understood the difference. While I stood in the dark of my Brooklyn patio, trying to reconcile the monster who had betrayed me with the man who had secretly kept me alive, Evander Mercer was across the city, dismantling his own life. He stood in the glass sunroom of his mother's estate. The room was a monument to Valeria Mercer's need for control. It was filled with white orchids that were replaced every 3 days, and the air always smelled of expensive, quiet things. Valeria was sitting in a wicker chair, sipping chamomile tea, looking out over the manicured gardens. She was entirely unbothered by the chaos she had caused. She believed she had already won. Evander did not announce himself. He just walked in, his footsteps heavy against the imported limestone floor. "You went to the press," Evander said. His voice was dangerously quiet. It lacked the polished cadence he usually reserved for his mother. Valeria did not turn around. She took a slow sip of her tea. "I protected our family, Evander. That girl is a parasite. She is trying to extort us. She owns our debt, Mother. She has the legal right to audit us." Evander stepped closer to her chair. "And you leaked lies about her, to sabotage her investors. You violated SEC regulations. You committed fraud." Valeria finally turned. Her silver hair caught the moonlight, and her eyes flashed with aristocratic disdain. She is a convicted thief. I simply reminded the public of her nature. You should be thanking me. If she calls that debt, we lose everything. We already lost everything, Evander said. Valeria frowned, setting her porcelain cup down on the glass table. What are you talking about? Evander reached into his coat and pulled out a thick, manila folder. He threw it onto the glass table. It landed with a heavy, final thud. I ran the deep-level diagnostics on the servers Zora demanded access to, Evander said. I bypassed the firewalls you and Cyrus installed to hide the charity fund. I found the original routing numbers from 5 years ago. He leaned over the table, planting both hands on the cold glass. He looked down at the woman who had shaped his entire life, the woman whose approval he had chased since he was a boy. Father did not just embezzle $50 million, Evander said, his voice hollow. He leveraged the entire company's intellectual property to a shadow syndicate to cover his losses. The patents, the algorithms, the European real estate holdings. It is all collateral. We do not own Mercer Global, Mother. We have been managing a ghost company for 5 years. Valeria's face paled, the aristocratic mask slipped, revealing a flash of genuine terror. That is impossible. Richard would never have risked the core patents. It is true, Evander said. And the holding company that bought the syndicate's debt last month? The one Zora represents? They did not just buy the loan, they bought the collateral. Zora does not just hold our debt. She holds the deed to our entire empire. Valeria sank back into her chair. Her hands trembled as she reached for her tea, but she pulled back, unable to steady herself. She owns us? She owns me, Evander corrected. He looked at his mother with a mixture of pity and absolute disgust. For 30 years, he had believed the Mercer name meant something. He had believed it was a legacy of innovation and strength. Now, he saw it for what it truly was, a hollow shell built on stolen money and broken lives. You made me frame the only woman I ever loved to protect a fortune that did not even exist, Evander said. The words tasted like ash. You destroyed her life for an illusion. Valeria's shock quickly hardened into defensive rage. She stood up, her pale cashmere shawl slipping from her shoulders. Evander, you have to fight her. You have to call the board. We can tie her up in litigation for years. We can freeze the assets. You have to do something. No, Evander interrupted. The word hung in the humid air of the sunroom. I am done fighting her, Evander said, stepping back. And I am done fighting you. He turned and walked toward the heavy glass doors. Where are you going? Valeria demanded, her voice trembling with sudden fear. She was losing control, and for a woman like Valeria Mercer, that was a fate worse than bankruptcy. Evander did not look back, to give her what she came for. The next morning, the sky over Manhattan was the color of bruised iron. A cold rain was falling, washing the streets clean. It felt like a baptism. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my bedroom. I was not wearing the obsidian suit from my first day back. Today, I wore a stark white suit. It was a deliberate choice. Obsidian was the color of mourning. White was the color of a blank slate. It was the color of a judge delivering a final verdict. Nia knocked softly on the doorframe. She was holding 2 cups of black coffee. She looked tired, but the tension that had lived between us since the night before was gone. We had talked until 2 in the morning. I had cried, and she had held me, just like she had in the federal medical ward. I forgave her, not because what she did was right, but because I understood the impossible choice she had been forced to make. She had chosen my life over my pride. You ready? Nia asked, handing me a cup. I was born ready, I said. I took a sip of the coffee. It was bitter and hot. "Are the federal compliance officers confirmed?" "They are waiting in the lobby," Nia said. "Arthur Sterling called again this morning. He wants back in. He heard the rumors that you have the unredacted logs. I told him to wait in line." I smiled. It was a small, genuine smile. Let him wait. I walked downstairs. Elion and Lyra were sitting at the kitchen island, eating oatmeal. Lyra had oatmeal in her hair. Elion was carefully wiping his spoon clean with a napkin. I kissed them both on the forehead. They smelled of sleep and milk. "Be good for Aunt Nia today," I told them. "Are you going to work, Mommy?" Elion asked, his gray eyes looking up at me. They were Evander's eyes. I had spent 4 years looking into them and seeing the man who had betrayed me. But this morning, I just saw my son. "Yes, baby," I said softly. "Mommy is going to finish her work." The drive to Mercer Global was a blur of rain-streaked windows and quiet anticipation. When the town car pulled up to the glass tower, the paparazzi were already there. The Financial Blog's article had done its job. Everyone knew that the disgraced former employee was back, and she was holding a gun to the head of Manhattan's oldest legacy. I stepped out of the car. I did not hide behind sunglasses. I let the cameras flash. I walked through the revolving doors, my heels clicking against the marble floor of the lobby. Nia was right behind me, carrying the leather folio. 2 federal compliance officers flanked us. When the elevator doors opened on the executive floor, the atmosphere was suffocating. The air was thick with tension, the smell of expensive cologne, and nervous sweat. Assistants scurried out of our way. The heavy oak doors of the boardroom were closed. I pushed them open. The room was packed. The entire board of directors was present. Cyrus sat near the front, his face flushed. Valeria sat by the window, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed on me with pure, unadulterated hatred. And at the opposite end of the long mahogany table sat Evander. He looked entirely at peace. That unnerved the board members more than his usual cold demeanor. He was not wearing a suit jacket. His sleeves were rolled up. He looked like a man who had finally put down a weight he had been carrying for a lifetime. I walked to the head of the table. The federal officers took their positions along the back wall. "Let us dispense with the theatrics," Cyrus sneered, leaning forward. "You called this emergency meeting, Ms. Vance. What is your demand? More money? A public apology?" I did not answer him. I placed my hands flat on the table and looked at Evander. He held my gaze. There was no defiance in his eyes, only a profound, aching sorrow. I pressed a button on the remote in my hand. The large screen behind me illuminated. It displayed a complex web of corporate structures, offshore accounts, and routing numbers. At the center of the web was a single name, Vance Restitution Partners. 5 years ago, I was accused of stealing $50 million, I began. My voice carried effortlessly across the silent room. The evidence was manufactured. The IP logs were altered by Cyrus Mercer, under the direct instruction of Valeria Mercer, to cover up the embezzlement committed by Richard Mercer. Cyrus stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. "This is slander. You have no proof. It is documented fact," I countered smoothly. I clicked the remote. A new slide appeared. It showed an internal email chain from 5 years ago, complete with Valeria's digital signature, authorizing the fabrication of my access logs. But that is not why we are here. We are here because Richard Mercer did not just steal money. He used Mercer Global's core software patents as collateral to a private shadow syndicate to cover his tracks. The room erupted into murmurs. Board members looked at each other in panic. Valeria's hands gripped the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles turned yellow. I clicked the remote one last time. The screen showed a deed of transfer. "A syndicate that, as of last month, is wholly owned by my firm," I said. The murmurs stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. I looked directly at Evander. I do not just hold your debt, Evander. I hold your foundation. I own the patents that power your software. I own the deeds to your European holdings. Mercer Global has been operating on stolen property for 5 years. And as of this morning, I am calling in the collateral. Valeria looked like she was going to be sick. You are going to bankrupt us, she whispered, her voice shaking with rage. You are going to destroy thousands of jobs just to satisfy your petty revenge. My eyes flashed. My revenge was surviving you. This is restitution. I opened my leather folio and pulled out a thick legal document. I slid it across the polished mahogany toward Evander. This is a transfer of all remaining assets, I said. Sign it and I will assume the company's liabilities. I will protect the employee pensions. I will restructure the debt. But the Mercer name comes off the building today. You walk away with nothing. The board members held their breath. They looked at Evander, expecting him to fight. They expected a legal war that would drag on for years, a battle of billionaires that would bleed the company dry. Cyrus was already reaching for his phone, likely to call their army of lawyers. But Evander did not reach for his phone. He looked at the document. Then he looked at me. His gray eyes were entirely clear. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a silver fountain pen. He uncapped it. The soft click echoed in the silent room. He leaned over the table and signed his name on the dotted line. Valeria gasped. Evander, no! It is done, Mother, Evander said quietly. He capped the pen, closed the folder, and pushed it back across the table to me. It is yours. It was always yours. I stared at him. I was thrown entirely off balance. I had prepared for a fight. I had prepared for him to use every loophole, every dirty trick his family had taught him. I had prepared to crush him. You are not going to contest it? I asked, my voice betraying a fraction of my shock. Evander stood up. He looked thinner, older, but somehow lighter. The heavy mantle of the Mercer legacy was gone. I spent 5 years living in a house built on your bones, Zora, he said. His voice was steady, but it carried a weight that made the air in the room vibrate. I do not want it. I have not wanted it since the day they took you away. He reached into his jacket again. This time he pulled out a small, worn manila envelope. He placed it gently on top of the signed contract. What is this? I asked, my guard instantly rising. A confession, Evander said. He looked around the boardroom. He looked at Cyrus, who was staring at him in horror. He looked at Valeria, whose face was a mask of shattered pride. It is a sworn affidavit, notarized, Evander continued, his eyes returning to mine. It details exactly how my family framed you. It includes the original IP logs, the communications between my mother and the security team, and my own admission of perjury. It is addressed to the Department of Justice. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the envelope. Evander, this will send you to prison. I know, he said softly. It is where I belong. You spent 5 years in a cage because of my cowardice. I am not asking for your forgiveness, Zora. I am just trying to give you back your name. He buttoned his jacket. He looked at the board members one last time. Effective immediately, I resign as CEO of Mercer Global. The company belongs to Ms. Vance. Without another word, Evander turned and walked toward the heavy oak doors. He did not look back. He walked out of the empire his family had killed for, leaving it all at the feet of the woman he had broken. The doors clicked shut behind him. I stood at the head of the table. The signed contract was under my hand. The confession rested on top of it. I had won. I had taken everything from them. I had cleared my name. The Mercer legacy was dead. So why did my chest feel so incredibly empty? I looked at the envelope. I thought about the man who had just thrown away his freedom to balance a scale that could never truly be balanced. I thought about the $10,000 a month he had paid to keep me safe in the dark. He had been a coward, but he was not a monster. And as I stood in the boardroom of the empire I had just conquered, I realized that my war was not over. It had just changed shape. I stood in the boardroom long after the room had emptied. The federal compliance officers had escorted a screaming Cyrus and a silent, stone-faced Valeria out to face the SEC. The board members had scattered like roaches when the lights come on, desperate to distance themselves from the collapsing Mercer legacy. I was alone at the head of the mahogany table. The signed transfer of assets sat under my left hand. Under my right hand was the worn manila envelope. I opened it. The confession was meticulous. Evander had not just admitted to perjury. He had laid out a complete chronological map of the conspiracy. He detailed his father's embezzlement, his mother's coercion, and his own signature on the fabricated IP logs. He had attached the original, unredacted server data that proved my innocence. He had signed it, dated it, and notarized it. It was a perfectly constructed instrument of his own destruction. He was going to hand this to the Department of Justice, and he was going to let them lock him in a federal penitentiary for a decade. I read the final line. I offer this freely, with no expectation of leniency, to restore the name and reputation of Zora Vance. I closed my eyes. I had spent 5 years dreaming of the day Evander Mercer would lose everything. I had imagined the satisfaction of watching him stripped of his power, his wealth, and his freedom. But holding this envelope, I did not feel victorious. I felt a profound, aching exhaustion. Prison would be an escape for him. In a cell, he would not have to look at the world he had broken. He would not have to face the daily, grinding work of making amends. He would just be a martyr for his family's sins, paying a debt to the state while the real damage remained unhealed. I pulled out my phone and dialed Nia. "Did you see the press release?" Nia answered, her voice buzzing with adrenaline. "The unredacted logs are everywhere. The financial blogs are already issuing retractions. Arthur Sterling is practically begging to reinvest. Zora, you did it. Your name is completely clear. I need you to call your contact at the DOJ, I said, my voice steady. The one in the fraud division." Nia paused. "Why? What is going on?" "Evander sent a confession," I said. "It is probably sitting in a mailroom or on a prosecutor's desk right now. I need you to flag it. I need you to pull it before it gets officially logged into evidence." "Zora, what are you doing?" Nia asked, her tone shifting from celebratory to cautious. "That confession is your ultimate insurance policy. If he goes to prison, the Mercer family can never touch you again." "I know," I said. I looked out the floor-to-ceiling window at the gray Manhattan skyline. "But if he goes to prison, he cannot be a father. And I am done letting the Mercer family dictate the terms of my life. Pull the affidavit, Nia. I am going to handle Evander myself." 3 days later, the city was bathed in the pale, watery light of late afternoon. Evander's penthouse on the Upper East Side was entirely unrecognizable. When I stepped out of the elevator and pushed open the heavy front door, the echo of my heels against the hardwood floor was the only sound. The space was completely bare. The imported Italian leather sofas, the abstract art that cost more than my childhood home, the grand piano in the corner, it was all gone. Evander had liquidated everything. He had transferred the funds into a blind trust to fully secure the employee pension fund that his father had nearly destroyed. He had walked away with absolutely nothing. He was standing in the center of the empty living room, packing a single, dark canvas duffel bag. He wore dark jeans and a simple gray sweater. He looked entirely stripped of the billionaire armor he had worn for his entire life. He looked like a man waiting for the end of the world. The doorbell had not rung. I had used the private elevator code I had memorized 5 years ago. Evander turned when he heard my footsteps. He froze. His gray eyes widened, and for a second, a flash of desperate hope crossed his face. before he forced it down. "Zora," he breathed, stepping back. "You should not be here. If the federal marshals see you—" "They are not coming, Evander," I said. I stepped fully into the room and let the door click shut behind me. He frowned, his hands resting on the duffel bag. "What do you mean?" "I mailed the confession to the director of the DOJ on Tuesday morning. They should have been here by now." "I intercepted it," I said. I walked slowly across the empty room. Nia has friends in the fraud division. They flagged the package before it hit the director's desk. I pulled it. Evander stared at me. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. "Why?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Zora, why would you do that? You need that to clear your name." "I already cleared my name," I said. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a folded newspaper. I tossed it onto the floor between us. The headline screamed about the Mercer Global scandal, detailing the fabricated evidence and the stolen $50 million. "When you signed over the company, you signed over the internal servers. I released the unredacted logs to the press 3 days ago. The world knows what your father did. They know what your mother did. My conviction is being formally vacated as we speak." Evander closed his eyes. A long, shuddering breath escaped his chest. "Thank God. But that does not excuse you," I said. My voice dropped, losing its professional polish. "You still signed the paper. You still stood on those marble steps and watched them take me away. You still chose your legacy over my life." "I know," he whispered. He opened his eyes, and they were shining with unshed tears. "That is why I am going to prison. I cannot undo what I did, Zora. But I can pay for it." "No, you are not," I said, stepping closer. "Because if you go to prison, you cannot be a father." Evander's head snapped up. The air in the room seemed to vanish entirely. "What?" I did not answer him with words. I turned and walked back to the front door. I opened it and looked out into the hallway. I gave a single nod. A moment later, Nia walked in, and holding Nia's hands were 2 4-year-old children, Elian and Lyra. Elian was wearing a small blue sweater. His gray eyes, so identical to the man standing across the room, were wide and observant as he took in the empty apartment. Lyra was wearing a bright yellow dress, her dark hair tied in 2 puffs, clutching her stuffed lion by the tail. Evander stopped breathing. He looked at the children. He looked at their faces. He saw the curve of Elian's jaw. He saw the fierce, defiant spark in Lyra's eyes. He saw himself. He saw me. His knees gave out. He sank to the hardwood floor, his hands coming up to cover his mouth, as a ragged, tearing sound ripped from his throat. It was a sound of absolute devastation. Tears, 5 years in the making, spilled over his fingers and dropped onto the bare floor. "Zora," he choked out, looking up at me with a face completely wrecked by grief. "I did not know. I swear to God, I did not know." "I know you did not," I said softly. My own eyes were burning, but I refused to let the tears fall. "I found out 3 weeks after I was locked up. I wrote to you. I sent 3 letters. Your mother intercepted them." Evander let out a sob, pressing his forehead against his knees. The magnitude of what he had lost, what he had been robbed of, crashed over him in real time. He had missed their first steps, their first words. He had let the woman carrying his children endure the horrors of a prison birth alone, while he sat in a penthouse drinking scotch and telling himself he was protecting her. Lyra, sensing the heavy distress in the room, pulled her hand from Nia's. She walked slowly across the floor toward Evander. She stopped a few feet away, tilting her head to the side. "Why is the man crying?" she asked. Her voice was bright and clear, echoing in the empty space. Evander looked up at his daughter. He was terrified to move, terrified to taint her with his presence. He wiped his face with the back of his sleeve, trying to compose himself. "I am just sad, sweetheart," he whispered. Lyra considered this. She reached into the pocket of her yellow dress and pulled out a slightly crushed purple crayon. She held it out to him. "Mommy says when you are sad, you color," Lyra said solemnly. "Purple is the best." Evander reached out with a trembling hand and took the crayon. He held it like it was the most fragile, precious thing in the world. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of guarded hope and agonizing pain. "You have a son," he whispered, looking at Elian, who was standing safely behind Naya's leg, "and a daughter." "I have 2 children," I corrected gently. "They are mine. I raised them. I protected them." "I know," Evander said. He did not argue. He did not demand rights. He just knelt on the floor of his empty empire, holding a purple crayon, entirely at my mercy. "They are perfect, because they are you." I walked over and knelt in front of him. The distance between us was only a few inches, but it spanned 5 years of agony, betrayal, and survival. "I pulled the affidavit because I do not want my children's father to be a convict," I said, my voice fierce and unyielding. "But that does not mean you get to walk back into our lives and play daddy. You lost that right." "I know," Evander said, tears tracking down his face. "I do not expect anything, Zora. Tell me what to do. Tell me how to earn it." I looked at him. I saw the broken man who had finally found his courage, even if it was 5 years too late. I saw the man who had given up everything to make things right. "You start by getting a job," I said, a small, genuine smile finally touching my lips. "Because I fired you, and child support is expensive." Evander let out a wet, broken laugh. He nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am." "And," I added, my voice softening just a fraction, "you can come to the park on Saturday. Elian likes the swings. Lyra likes the sandbox. 1 hour. Supervised." Evander nodded, clutching the purple crayon against his chest like a lifeline. "I will be there." 6 months later, the city was bathed in the golden light of early autumn. I stood on the sidewalk outside a modest brick building in Brooklyn. The gold lettering on the glass door read, "Vance and Hayes Forensic Accounting." Inside, the office was bustling. Nia was at the front desk, laughing on the phone with a client. The company was thriving. We were taking on cases to help ordinary people fight corporate fraud, going after the exact kind of shadow syndicates that had nearly destroyed my life. It was everything I had ever wanted. The Mercer name was gone. Valeria and Cyrus were facing federal indictments for fraud, perjury, and corporate espionage. The empire had been dismantled, the assets sold to pay off the debts, and the employee pensions fully protected. Evander had kept his word. He had walked away with nothing. I checked my watch. It was 3 o'clock on a Saturday. Down the street, a man was walking toward the building. He was not wearing a bespoke suit. He wore dark jeans, a simple navy sweater, and a canvas jacket. He carried a canvas tote bag over his shoulder. Evander stopped in front of the glass door. He looked at me through the window. He looked healthier. The hollow, haunted exhaustion that had defined him for 5 years was gone, replaced by a quiet, grounded strength. He had taken a job as a mid-level logistics analyst. He paid his child support on time, every single month. He went to therapy twice a week. He was doing the work. I pushed the door open. The bell chimed above us. "Hey," Evander said. His voice was warm, and his eyes crinkled at the corners. "Hey," I replied, "you are late." "Had to stop at the bakery," Evander said, pulling a small white box from his tote bag. Lyra requested the chocolate croissants, and Elian wanted the ones with the sugar on top. I smiled, stepping aside to let him in. "They are in the back room. Nia is trying to teach them how to use a spreadsheet." Evander laughed, a genuine bright sound that filled the small foyer. He stepped inside, but before he went to the back room, he paused and looked at me. "Thank you," he said softly. I looked at the man who had broken my heart. The man who had spent the last 6 months painstakingly gluing the pieces of his own soul back together. I knew the road ahead would be long. There would be days when the memory of the handcuffs would make me pull away. There would be days when his guilt would threaten to drown him. But as I listened to the sound of my children cheering in the back room as their father walked in, I realized something profound. Revenge can clear your name, and truth can free your past. But love, real love, is not a desperate grasp in the dark. It is a deliberate choice made in the light. I did not take him back because he was rich, or because he was powerful. I gave him a chance because he finally learned what it costs to be worthy of me. "Do not thank me," I said, reaching out to adjust the collar of his jacket. My fingers lingered against his neck, feeling the steady, strong beat of his pulse. "Just be here, every Saturday." Evander covered my hand with his. His gray eyes were filled with a devotion that no fortune could ever buy. "Every Saturday," he promised, "for the rest of my life." I smiled, and for the first time in 5 years, I was not looking back at the wound. I was looking forward to the healing. If you believe that true love requires true accountability, share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below on what you think Evander needs to do next to earn his place in their family. And do not forget to subscribe for our next story of love, dignity, and justice.